Welcome everyone to another episode of Shift with Elena Agar. In this conversation, I am joined by David Armstrong. He's a wealth management advisor. He's been in this business for over 20 plus years, doing his own thing, and prior to that, working for some of the biggest names in the industry. We really talked about understanding the difference between financial advisors and wealth managers. How do you find a good one? How do you know when you need one? Who needs one? Who doesn't need one? And so on. For myself, I grew up really not knowing much about financial literacy or money. It's not something that was talked about in my family necessarily, and it's not the culture I just grew up around. So anytime I get to talk to somebody about finances and, kind of like, what do you invest in? What does that look like? Who do I trust? Who do I not trust? How do I educate myself? I'm always a fan of doing that because I think ultimately for our career success, we really need to be smarter with our money. So, and I certainly have not been in the beginning of my early careers. So really just looking to kind of have these takeaways when I speak with people. So, we talked about how do you always have cash? Do you invest that cash? Do you put into savings? What does that look like? Understanding your financial goals and really just finding the right advisor that can make all the difference if that's something you're interested in. So if you're interested in financial literacy and how you can make the most out of what you have to work with currently in your life and how can you elevate yourself to the next financial level, this episode is definitely for you. Check it out. As always, hit like, subscribe, comment, suggest any other episodes you want me to cover with different guests. I'm all ears. I appreciate you being here. Thank you. Dave, welcome to the Shift Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. It's great to connect with you.
I'm excited to talk all about wealth management and just financial health. My audience knows, but I grew up in Russia where we don't think about financial management. We don't think about tomorrow. We just think about today, which is a very different approach to how kind of things are done in America, or so I thought. And then I was very surprised to find out that so many people don't know anything about not only managing the money they have, however little or a lot, but also just not understanding how to, just the basic financial literacy. So I'm excited to chat with you about that. But I really want to kick off with your career story because it's very interesting. You spent first part of your career in the U.S. Marine Corps, and then you went into financial management. So talk me a little bit through, your early career experience in the military and then what led you to do what you're doing today.
Yeah, thanks. So when I decided to go to college, one of the decision points that I came to was whether or not I was going to join the one of the branches of the military when I eventually graduated from college and become an officer. And I originally was interested in becoming a pilot in the Navy because I was I'll call it a victim, but I was the beneficiary of watching Top Gun, and I just wanted to be Maverick and Goose and fly planes, and I just thought that would be really great. So I joined a Navy ROTC unit at the University of South Carolina, and then eventually graduated from there and received a commission in the United States Marine Corps, which is part of the Department of the Navy. And I thought I was going to go be a pilot, but in the end of my senior year in college, I had a friend of mine who tragically passed away in a training accident, and it really made me decide I didn't want to be a pilot anymore. But I had spent all of this time, let's just call it my freshman year, 18 years old until I was 22 years old, training to become an officer in the United States Marine Corps. I had no higher priority in my life. In fact, I have a hard time even remembering the name more than 3 classes I took in college. But going to college was just a vehicle to get to receive a commission in the Marine Corps. And so all my heart and soul went into that. And for the first 5 or 6 years of my life, I had it made. I was living my dream as a Marine officer. I was deploying all over the world. I was flying in helicopters and parachuting out of planes. And for a kid who grew up lighting firecrackers off as a teenager, I was walking ashore to places with more explosives in my pack than I could have ever imagined as a kid, lighting off fireworks. And I really just was totally living my dream until all of a sudden I discovered a passion that started out as a hobby and ended up becoming a passion for a career. And when I was deployed on ships, I kept getting paid a paycheck, but I couldn't spend the money and started to amass what I thought at the time was a lot of money. And my dad gave me some advice on how to invest, but at the same time, the internet sensation was becoming a thing. And there was the ability to research stocks and participate in conversations online with people who are, analyzing stocks. I wanted to spend all my waking hours researching and investing in individual securities. And so it dawned on me that I was more passionate about wanting to do that than what it was that I had set out my whole life to begin with to do, and decided to get off of active duty and go back to graduate school so I could actually get a more traditional education or a formal education in finance and learn it, because I didn't take any business classes in college. So I went back and got my MBA, and then started working for a few investment banks in New York City, and then eventually in the Washington, D.C. area. And through a couple of different mergers and some experience at a big firm, I decided in May of 2008 that I was going to start my own company. And there's a number of different reasons for that. We can get into it if it's interesting to you. But I decided I wanted to start my own company. So my still existing business partner and I, in May of 2008, we started Monument Wealth Management, and we're coming up on our 17-year anniversary, and it's crazy. So I'm a small business owner. I still do financial wealth management and investing work. I do a lot of marketing now. I run our podcast, Off the Wall, and I enjoy all of that. It's great. So it's a great mix of wealth management and marketing and talking. It's almost like having my own radio show where I get to talk about the thing I'm really passionate about, which is great. I also stayed in the Marine Corps as a reservist. So 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer, kind of like people in the Army do in the National Guard. So I did do a full career in the Marines, but that from 1997 until 2018, I did the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer.
Nice. And I do appreciate the whole kind of having your own talk show. That's how I feel about my podcast, except I get to talk to brilliant people like yourself. So it's really, really cool. And I know you do the same as well. You have guests on your podcast. I am curious, when did you decide, like when you decided to start a business, why was it at that time? Because I think right now there's a lot of people in their careers, I think more than ever, maybe because I'm in that world, but a lot of people are actually thinking like, maybe I should just do my own thing, but everybody's always looking like, when is the right time? So what was it for you?
So that is a very complicated answer, but I can tell you that the factors that weighed into my personal decision on that topic, they're different now, because the internet and marketing and the digital medium has created such an opportunity for people to, I think that the cool term for it is side hustle on some of these things, and or create their own businesses in it. Those opportunities didn't exist when I started my own business. So I think people that are looking at becoming an entrepreneur and starting their own business now, the opportunity set is completely different than it was when I even just 17 years ago. But I reached a point, and this is a combination of really being empowered. I would go back to my Marine time, being empowered as a decision maker, where as an officer, I had the opportunity to make decisions at a very young age and be decisive in the decisions that I made, quickly assess risk, and come up with a plan of attack and carry it out. Or, any sort of decision to do training or anything like that. So I was very confident in my decision making ability. But unfortunately, it also created this personality trait where I became critical of other people's decision making as well, because I was compared to how I would have made a decision. And that little, crack in the dam, if you will, started very early in my post active duty Marine Corps career, when I started working for all these other firms, because I did have managers and people who were over me, and it just the divergence of opinions on how to run the business, and the divergence of opinions on how you should service clients, and what it is that you actually do for a living, just became wider and wider and wider. So emotionally, I had already made a decision that I thought I could run the business better than everybody who was my boss. Now, that may sound to a listener like a really immature way of looking at something, but at that snapshot in time, it was a very powerful emotion for me. Then I also coupled it just with your standard economics of the business that I was running. And I felt like for the amount of money that the company I was working for was retaining from the revenue that I generated, they weren't let's call it cost of goods sold. the cost of goods sold, I wasn't getting any benefit. There was no value proposition for that give up of money. And I thought, well, if I had access to that money, I would spend it completely different, and I'd make decisions that were in the best interest of me as a business owner and my clients who were paying me. And that wasn't really possible staying at a big firm. So there was the combination of my emotional state and, and my experience combined with my experience, as well as just doing this spreadsheet math on how I could redeploy the financial resources that were being retained by the company that I was working for if I had access to them, to decide how that was spent myself.
Mhm. That's interesting. And I know that you have this kind of like no bullshit approach basically to financial management, right? So
Okay,
talk to
I
me
can
a
say
little
that.
bit.
Yes, no
Yeah.
bullshit approach. Yes. Uh,
Talk to me a little bit more about that. What does that mean?
Somebody earlier today said that my style is more prophetic, and that I tend to have this here's how you should do this or you're going to go to hell kind of attitude about things. And when they said it, I wasn't sure if I should take it as a compliment or not. It was a compliment, and I appreciated it very much. But that's just my archetype personality style, if you will. And I think that when people hire other people for what we call unfiltered opinion and straightforward advice, they don't want things sugar coated, and they probably don't have time, because clients that come to us, they're looking to have us help them make a decision. And absent unfiltered opinions and straightforward advice, it's really hard to do that for clients. And so I said, and we have adopted as a culture, that even if something is a painful message to deliver, or if it feels like a punch in the face, we're going to deliver it because that's what they're actually paying us to do. And then I think I just became a little empowered, because as I started to communicate in the digital medium with people, the feedback I got from clients that I really like and respect, and people that I really like and respect, they just said, when I read something that you write, or I listen to something that you say, it's as if I'm sitting down and having a beer with you and you just giving it to me straight. And I was like, well, maybe that's sort of the persona that I should be adopting.
Mm. And I mean, frankly speaking, I appreciate that kind of persona. I was talking to somebody in sales, and I'm like, there's a lot of, it's like people feel like they have to put on this show, this very formal thing, or this like salesy approach. And sometimes you just need somebody who just gives it to you straightforward, who explained in the simple terms, especially if you don't understand parts of investment on wealth management and so on. And sometimes that's the best approach. So it's really nice to hear, because I tend to see that, and I think that's what people get turned off around financial advisors, because some of them have a bad rap. Well, let's be honest,
Yeah,
right? Like,
right.
and I think part of it is that it's just this heaviness of like the formality, and it's almost intimidating, and it also doesn't build trust.
Right. And the industry has done a really poor job of policing itself, because there is such a wide swath of people. When everybody can call themselves a financial advisor, everybody does. So you can be an insurance salesman and call yourself a financial advisor. There's no
Mm,
regulatory definition of the word. You could be a hedge fund manager and call yourself a financial advisor. And the reality of it is, there's no definition to financial advisor. You don't even have to have a college degree to hold yourself out as a financial advisor. So when everybody can call themselves one, everybody does. And one of the problems with that is you get this big spectrum of people and personalities, and it gets polluted with salesmen of products on one end of the spectrum, and then sellers of advice on the other end of the spectrum, but everybody thinks that they're the same thing. So it's really hard to compare. It's like a football player, a basketball player, and a baseball player all getting together and talking about sports, but each one of them is playing a different game.
mm,
And you, as somebody listening to those three people, you don't know if you're a baseball player, a football player, or a
yeah.
basketball player. And so you really don't know who to listen to, because everybody's playing a sport that gets scored differently and has different rules and all kinds of things. So the industry does a really poor job of that. I feel like the internet has made it way easier for people to determine whether or not the opinions and advice that a financial advisor or a financial advisory firm, wealth management firm like Monument, they can look at our things and say, like, these people make sense to me and I like and trust them, and what they're saying makes sense. And they can essentially interact with it. It's asynchronous, but they can interact with us and see what it is that we're saying. And if it resonates with them, they tend to reach out and ask more questions.
So what are some ways, in addition to, let's say somebody, doesn't know where to start or where to look, like what are some ways to, weed through the football and the basketball players and the baseball players to get to like your player that you need to play the game that you actually want to play or need to play, I guess, in financial
Right.
world?
So I always like to tell, okay, the first answer to that question is Google something like, how do I pick a wealth management advisor? How do I pick a financial advisor? Lots of people have written content on some of the things that a consumer, I'll just call them, should know in advance and the questions they should ask in order to find the right fit for themselves. Now, stepping back from that a little bit, I think the first thing that somebody wants to do is they need to answer the question for themselves. And if they can't answer this question, they need to make sure whoever they hire can walk them through making this decision is, what's the money for? Because people have different goals for their money and they have different motivations for how they want to manage the money. So some people, one end of the spectrum can be somebody who says, I want to take this money and double it in 2 years. Okay, that's one use of the money. And then the other end of the spectrum could be, I have all this money and what I want to do is steward it in a way that I can match up the asset with the liabilities that I'm going to create, which are wants and needs. And so if I want to go buy a car, that want is creating a liability. I want to go to college. I want to buy a house. I want to go on 3 vacations a year. Those create liabilities, and the asset pool needs to be able to fund that. So you have to understand what's the money for. A really poor answer to what's the money for is, I don't know, I just wanted to grow more. And that's not an answer that you can put a number on, and it's not something you can model, because more doesn't have a definition. More becomes you can, if you can say, I want my money to grow more in order to fund these goals and objectives I have. Now you have something that you can put some math behind and start to figure out and determine what are the probabilities of success. What sort of probabilities do you have of actually meeting those goals and objectives? That's really where a lot of the help a financial advisor can give somebody who's looking to pay to hire one. And I'll say this too, this isn't a very popular opinion, but I'll just say it. There's nothing wrong with doing it yourself either. And I will use an example of a landscaper. So if you're the kind of person who wants to wake up at 7:30 on a Saturday morning and get your tractor and your weed eater and your lawnmower out and your blower and edger and all those things and spend 4 or 5 hours on a Saturday morning manicuring your lawn to look great, then do it yourself. But you have to buy the equipment, have the equipment, maintain the equipment, pay attention to things, and have some know-how. Great. People can totally do that. There's other people who say, like, well, I'm totally capable of doing it. That's not how I want to spend my Saturday morning. I want to spend my Saturday morning taking a run or exercise or going to the kids' soccer games and things like that. So they pay somebody to do those things. That's a big decision that people should be taking on themselves too, which is, do you have the tools and time available to do it yourself? Because frankly, you can. Now, I will caution that there's a lot of behavioral aspects of people's, when people do it themselves, they tend to create some behavioral biases that could be detrimental to overall growth, like overconfidence or things like that. That a wealth manager will also say, like, oh, that's not really a good decision. So, but people should be looking at that as an option as well.
How do I know if I need a financial advisor or a wealth management? Are they the same? How much money do I need to have? Like, at what point do you have wealth to manage? Like, is there like a number associated? Like, okay, once you hit like 1 million, you can now manage your wealth. Or like, what is it? Like, how do I determine that?
Yeah. Well, that's great, because it goes back to when everybody can call themselves a financial advisor, everybody does. So I think it might be easier to, rather than answer the question in terms of a terminology, let me answer it in terms of needs, actual needs. Because there are wealth managers and financial advisors and wealth management firms that cater to different personas and people and wants and needs and asset level. So a very common cutoff point people say is like, I only have this much money, or a financial advisor and or wealth management firm will say like, we only work with clients of this level of wealth. And the reason for that is because there are different needs of expertise across the spectrum of wealth. So if you're a college student and in your first job and you're saving up money to get a down payment for a house and fully fund your 401k and pay off your student loans debt, things like that, probably a basic financial planner who can help you just construct a plan to save, invest, and pay off debt responsibly, more of like a financial coach. That's an engagement that is more of a specialty than saying hiring somebody like Monument, where we tend to work with people who have $3 million and have very complex wealth needs. Like, I have a trust and estate plan, and I need to make sure that the money that I have is going to go where I want it to go when I pass away. Because when people pass away, you can really boil it down to this. There's only 4 places that money can go when you're alive, regardless of your level of wealth. You can either spend it during your lifetime, and to the extent that there's $1 left in the bank at when you pass, or you're second to die, let's call it, because you're a married couple, that money can only go to the 3 remaining places: friends and family, charity, and in some cases, taxes. So as people start to spectrum, ascend through the wealth spectrum, their needs and need for advice on how to structure all of that becomes way more complex than the person who focuses and helps out people with, let's create a good spending plan, savings plan, debt payment plan in the beginning, and saving up for a house. The needs for advice start to diverge, and that's where the spectrum of wealth managers come in. So if somebody's looking to hire a wealth manager, they always need to come back and say, what's the money for? What am I trying to achieve here? Because if a 23-year-old came to me and said, can you help me with my spending plan, savings plan, and debt payment plan, I'd say, like, sure, I'm totally capable of doing it. But I know somebody who focuses on that exclusively, whereas for me, it's sort of like hiring an engine mechanic to change your tires. It's just not the right fit, and you're probably paying for something that you're not getting the benefit out of. Whereas if somebody looks at their wealth and says, geez, I just need some advice of some people who have a lot of experience and different skill sets to give me good, solid advice on how to do this, that's the different end of the spectrum. So I think it's more incumbent on the person who's seeking the advice to find the right advisor than it is anything else. And a lot of that can be done by just going to a website and seeing, okay, do they say who they work with? Have I arrived at a website that says, yes, this is what I need? And dig in on that and kind of determine whether or not that person is saying that they work with people in your demographic and level of wealth.
I'm curious in your thoughts on this. Do you think we can one day, or maybe now, I don't know, I haven't tried this actually, but can we ask AI for financial advice?
I mean, I think you can. It depends. It goes back to, okay, I don't know the answer to that question. Right now, I don't think so, because there's so many different inputs into financial decision making and financial planning that requires so much back and forth and people to understand the nuances and have an actual relationship with somebody so they can give them good advice. I don't think that AI will be able to. I think an AI will be able to augment a financial advisor's ability to help clients and or scale the business. I don't ever see an environment where it removes the human nature of advice. It's just, right now, I just think it's too nuanced. Now, people could be listening to this and saying, he doesn't understand AI, and maybe I don't. But what I do understand is that there's a human element in things that if I use ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot to ask them a question, a lot of times I get answers that are still need some sort of human review and human input. So I think it will be an augmentation tool and not a replacement tool.
And even if you're not educated in a world of financial management, that answer, like, it doesn't mean anything to you, or it can mean something good or bad depending on how you read it. Because if you're reading something, it could be like, it could give you an advice, but if you don't know the pros and cons of that advice, like it's, you know what I mean? So to your point, like you need somebody to analyze the actual answer, I would think.
Right.
Yeah.
And if the person putting the prompt into AI doesn't understand the right questions to ask,
Correct.
you could get an answer back that's 100% correct, yet not applicable to your situation as a person.
Mm. Let me ask you this. So this is something that I get very confused about, because people say, okay, you have a certain amount of money, right? And
Mhm.
there's this battle between like, how much do you need to have saved in cash and how much of it do you actually invest, right? Because investing has its risks and so on. So is there like a rule of thumb of like, here's how much you need to have in cash, you know, and then you invest the rest of it? Or is it better to just invest? Because they say like, if it's just sitting in your savings, you're wasting your time, right? Like it's just not utilizing it.
Yeah. So I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but it comes back to, again, what's the money for? So
Mhm.
here is some standard advice that I give my clients for free, anybody listening, is that no one is ever in possession of facts about the future because they simply don't exist. People can speculate, people can make educated guesses, people can use probability and statistics to figure out what's the likelihood of something to happen. But at the end of the day, nobody knows what's going to happen 5 minutes from me talking right now. So, if you want a basic rule of thumb and an answer, this is what I tell people. Because you can't predict what the market is going to do in the short term, and we can assume that the market is always going to have corrections. There will always be periods of time where the market pulls back 5%. Statistically, that happens 3 times a year. Pulls back 10%, statistically once every 18 months. Pulls back 20%, statistically once every 3 years, give or take. Then we can say with some sort of level of assurity that the market is going to go down at some point in the future. The question is, are you going to need money out of your portfolio when those pullbacks are happening?
Mhm.
And the answer is maybe. However, only you can answer that question for yourself. So, as a rule of thumb, I say to people, if you know that you're going to have a need for cash, let's just use right now, today, the 5th of December, as we're recording, right? The market closed at an all-time high yesterday, and Bitcoin just crossed 100,000. Right? So
Mhm.
by the time it's posted in January, maybe it'll be 250,000. Who knows? Could be one. But if the market is at an all-time high, and you know I'm going to be taking a very expensive vacation to Italy in the summer, and I'm going to buy a new car, and I'm buying a new house, so I need a bigger down payment, or I'm going to renovate a kitchen, and I know it's going to cost me $100,000. Things like, if you know, very few needs for cash are really surprises. Okay, so if you could project your need for cash over the next 12 to 18 months, and the market's at an all-time high, I think there's a justification for selling some of your equity assets and converting it into cash and holding on to it just as cash for the next 12 to 18 months, where you're still getting a decent return on a money market fund of around 4%.
Mhm.
Whether or not that was 4% or zero, I would argue that if you raised $100,000 to renovate a kitchen today, and in July of the summer when you're going to start the project, the market has gone down 20%, you'd say, like, God, thank God I raised that cash in December.
Mhm.
However, if you get to July and you raise that cash now, and you get to July and you've been sitting on that cash at a 4% money market rate for the past 7 months, let's call it 8 months, and the market goes up 10% more from here, very few people are going to say, I should have left that money in the market, and
Yeah.
I really made a huge mistake. People don't tend to say that. People just say, well, it would have been nice if I had made 10% more, but I have the money and I already feel like it's out of the portfolio. And the rest of my portfolio is still growing 10%.
Mhm.
And maybe that 10% gain is already made up for the $100,000 that you raised out of it. So I'm a huge advocate of making financial decisions about how much cash you have and how much cash you save up based on projecting your cash flow needs for the next 12 to 18 months. Now, caveat, if you are a person who is on a W 2 income and you work for a company and you have what I'll call layoff risk, okay, so if you're in the United States military and you're getting a paycheck, your layoff risk is zero. Okay. If you're a government employee, your layoff risk, well, who knows with the new administration, but
Hmm.
ostensibly it's low, right? You don't tend to fire government employees. But if you work for a small business, XYZ, and a market contraction could cause layoffs, you could find yourself in the receiving end of some bad news the next day you walk in the door. If that's the case, I would advocate for you having 6 to 8 months of living expenses in cash all the time so that if you do get laid off, you've got that cash already accessible because the liquidity is the most valuable part of that, not the growth of that
Hmm.
cash. That's truly got a purpose. What's the money for? The money's in case I get laid off.
Yeah.
So access to that cash, and it can still be in an investment portfolio, but access to that cash is a very powerful tool for somebody because if they get laid off in July and the market's down 20% off of its all-time high, and then you get laid off because of that, and now you say, well, geez, I wish I had had 6 to 8 months of cash available and I should have raised it in December when the market was at an all-time high. That tends to be the regret function that comes in. So that's
Hmm.
my caveat to cash is I think if you look at it and you say, do I have access to 12 to 18 months of, or 6 to 8 months of my salary saved up to where I can tap into that if something bad happened? Yes, that's a great use for cash.
Hmm.
I'm taking an expensive trip to Italy in the summer. Add that cash to that bucket of layoff risk cash. And I think that's good standard advice for anybody. Of course, I can't know everybody's personal situation, but that's just general all around good, safe advice.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's pretty solid. So my friends and I speak on this quite often. We say, you know what? If only we would have invested in Alphabet or Facebook or Nvidia, whichever the company that produced Ozempic. I forget Nvidia. I think. Am I
I think
getting
by
the?
Lily is well. There's I lose track of who made what, but yes,
Yeah,
let's
but
just like eat up the food. Right.
those kinds. So we talk about it quite often. We're like, and kind of ask each other like, okay, what's on the horizon? Like, what does any like, what should we be looking out for that could become the next Alphabet, Facebook, Ozempic producer kind of companies that's gonna, generate a lot of wealth. Like, is there a way to know except just like educating yourself, or like how do you know what
Okay,
to, or
so
like Bitcoin, for example, that was a big one, right?
if I knew the answer to that question about the next Nvidia stock now, we wouldn't be doing this podcast because I would have no internet access on my own private island in the Caribbean somewhere. Okay, so that's my kitschy way of saying, yeah, nobody has any facts about the future. Impossible. Now, how do you make sure that you're invested in the next stock that will do that? The next Nvidia, the next Google, any of those magnificent seven as they're referred to now? Well, that's pretty easy for somebody who is younger and investing in a 401k and just buy access to the S&P 500 index, and you're guaranteed through the ownership of 500 stocks in that one investment to make sure that you're in Nvidia and you're in Google and you're in Microsoft and you're in Tesla and all of those things that are part of the S&P 500. You already have those things if you're just an index investor in the S&P 500 index, in this example, and there's other indexes. But I think that is a guaranteed, well, almost guaranteed way of making sure that you have exposure to the next stock that does go up 100, 200, 300%. It's
Mm-hmm.
really hard to say, I'm going to take all my money and buy 5 stocks, so I'm betting. You probably have better odds going to Vegas and putting all your chips on red or black on the roulette table.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, that's pretty helpful.
Mhm.
I'm curious, so to take us to your podcast a little bit, because there's a podcast that has become a big thing. So talk to me a little bit about what inspired you to. I know you mentioned kind of to share content and knowledge with people, but like what inspired you to start the podcast? Who is it for? Who should listen to it?
So okay, that's there's two questions embedded there. So I have a podcast through Monument Wealth Management called Off the Wall, and that is specifically geared towards investing and commentary about investing and things like that. I also have a podcast project on the side that has nothing to do with my business that does interviews, long form interviews with senior military officers called Moments in Leadership. So I'm going to focus my answer on the Monument podcast, but I may bring in an analogy from the other one as well. I don't want to confuse a listener. So
Okay.
the Off the Wall podcast with Monument, I grew up with listening to talk radio and hearing Howard Stern interview people. He also does his, more crude jokes and everything like that. But the interviews, I always listen to the Howard Stern interviews. And I grew up with listening to some other people on the radio who had legit radio shows on AM, talking about money, like Rick Edelman comes to mind, or Dave Ramsey, or any of those people. I always thought to myself, God, I would love to have my own radio show. I would have so much fun having a radio show if I was talking about something that I really liked. And then all of a sudden, this podcast thing comes out of nowhere. And now I can have my own radio show without having to have my own radio show. That's what initially got me interested in the idea of doing it was, geez, I really can live this dream of having a radio show. What really moved us into doing it was I used to write a blog on almost a weekly basis. And I thought, well, instead of sitting down and writing this thing, why don't I just sit down and talk this thing? And then we developed the idea for Off the Wall. My co-host is Jessica Gibbs. She's one of my business partners at Monument. And so she and I are a good personality, yin and yang, on the podcast. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if either the podcast was just us riffing on some topic, or we brought in guests and they talk about what their specialty is. And we just decided to hit record one day and do it, and it's become very popular. I think now what I really like about it is it's a creative outlet for me, because I do enjoy talking to people. I do enjoy talking about what I do for a living and the things that I've learned over a 25-year career in this. And asking people and setting people up to answer what they've learned over their 25 careers in a totally different field. But the benefit is, and this goes back to the business model, is that it allows people to listen to what I'm saying, because I can be a little off the chain sometimes on the podcast, but you're getting the real authentic Dave Armstrong sometimes, right? If I have something to say and I want to say it, I say it. If an expletive comes out of my mouth, so be it. That's just how it goes. And so people can listen to me talk. They can listen to Jessica and I talk. They can listen to Jessica and I ask informed questions of experts, and they can start to say, I like this podcast. I like Dave and Jessica. I'm looking for a wealth manager, or my wealth manager isn't really living up to my expectations. And when people finally do reach out to us and start asking us questions, they've already probably decided that they want to hire us anyway, because they've just gotten to know us so well. So now when I meet people, a lot of times people feel like they already know me, and even before I ever meet them for the first time. That's been the real benefit to us. The podcast is, let me say this in reverse. If somebody doesn't like what I'm saying, they'll never call me, which is great.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
They sit there and say, like, this Armstrong guy is a total effing idiot.
Yeah.
There's no way I'd ever hire him. He's never filling out forms, or like calling up the office, or reaching out through a friend and saying, like
the filtering system itself.
I mean, and it is a powerful portion of marketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it builds that trust and credibility without you actually meeting that person. Before you even meet them, essentially. I'm curious, as we kind of come to an end of this chat, what are some of the questions that I'm not asking you and you're like, I really wish people would ask me this question more?
Yeah, wow, I could go on for another 30 minutes about that. You know what? Okay, so I will answer that question.
One or two questions.
Right. I'll answer that question from the context of being a financial advisor, owner of a wealth management firm, and what I wish people would ask me and or other people that they are talking about hiring is, what is your actual process for taking my wants, needs, goals, objectives, whatever synonym you want to throw in there on that thing? What is your process for taking that information from me and constructing a plan that increases the probability that I'm going to be able to meet those goals and objectives, or, like I said in the beginning, these liabilities? And can you explain to me what your process is, and what are the tools that you use to get there? There's a lot of industry standard tools out there, and they're great, and people should use them. But what you're really asking that question for is you want to hear somebody answer it and not dance around it. And if
Mm,
you start hearing things like proprietary this, and we have a great mutual fund company that we use, and things like that, you should start to interpret those answers. The reason you're asking those is because you want to interpret, like, am I dealing with a salesperson who's merely a conduit between my account and companies that invest the money, and all they are is a relationship manager? Are they just a conduit to products?
mm,
Or are these people actually putting their smart people skills to work to help me come up with that plan? And people who are just salespeople, sorry, that those people don't have a plan. They don't have a process. They don't have a group of people who are thinking through things. They're not asking questions, and they're probably saying whatever it is that they think they need to say in order to get you to give them the money so they can invest it and get paid.
mm,
You want to ask those questions. I want people to ask those questions so they totally understand what it is that they're hiring. Because going back to when everybody can call themselves a financial advisor, everybody will. That means that there's people out there selling products for commission that have a huge incentive to just get you into that product and walk away. And I will criticize the insurance industry there because everybody's familiar with it, and that's a lot of that is what goes on. There's some fantastic insurance people who don't act like that, but there are a lot that do. Or the old school stock brokers, which are kind of already washed out of the system. But people who are using products and getting paid to put your money in those products, ask questions. So I'm not saying that people don't want that. My personal opinion is you shouldn't want that, but make sure you're asking the right questions to make sure that you know what you're getting, and you can get the answer to that through finding out what somebody's process is.
mm. No, that's helpful. What trends do you see in your industry coming up? Like we touched on AI, but like what are the things that we should be aware of as consumers, I guess, of these
Yeah.
services? Like what's coming up?
Well, that's that. It's a continuation of my previous answer, which is the trend is that the industry is getting farther and farther away from the big firms who employ people to just say, "Give me your money and I'll invest it like this." So when I started out in the industry 25 years ago, that was a great business model. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, if you give me your money, I have access to the best money managers, and I'm going to make sure that you've got the smartest people managing your money. And that's all I do is I take the money and put it into a portfolio. Let's just call that what it was. And great. But now people are saying, well, if all you're going to do is come up with a plan for how my asset allocation should look, and I should have this large cap mutual fund manager or portfolio manager, people can get that information on the internet right now. So if
Mm,
you just type in, how should I invest my money so that it's diversified, it's a diversified equity investment, AI and the internet will give you that answer. How can I best invest my 401k for a 30-year growth plan? Boom. To include tickers for ETFs, the lowest cost ETFs. So the industry is getting away from saying, I'm going to manage your money, and moving now towards, you're going to pay me to give you good advice. And that includes how to manage your money, but it includes a lot of other things too. People are no longer going to, there's all sorts of commentary in my industry about how fees are being compressed. And frankly, I think they're only being compressed for the commoditized part of the business, which is building portfolios for people. And that puts the bigger, more traditional firms that you would, I don't want to say their names, but like the bigger firms that you would associate with wealth management across the investing space, you see their commercials on TV. Let me put it to you that way.
mhm.
Their business model is becoming stressed now because the consumer isn't willing to pay somebody a fee just to build portfolios. They want advice, and that is causing a massive shift in the industry.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely see that as a consumer. At least that's what I want as well. I want advice. I don't want to
Right.
just, like I want to be educated about that stuff.
Yeah.
Listen, it's been really, really nice to chat with you. Where can people find you? Where can get in touch with you? Listen to your podcast? Where do you hang out at the most?
Yeah, thanks. So everything is centralized on our website, which is monumentwealthmanagement.com. And then from there, you can find all the different resources that we have. You can get to our podcast from there, which is also on all the major podcast players. So if you just type Monument off the wall, it'll pop up. And also on our website, you can subscribe to what we call Monument Unfiltered, which by design, is a little unfiltered. And we share a lot of our opinions and advice on that newsletter as well. And then, of course, any of the major social media accounts we're posting things there. So think LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube, which is where we host video portions of our podcast, can all be found on our channels, which are all branded Monument Wealth Management.
Beautiful. David, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It was great talking to you, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk to you about what I think is going on in the industry.